And if I can find time in the future, I want to talk about those really good episodes as well in the top 20 best list. And here I am with the top 20 best Frasier episodes. Deciding on this list was really hard because let's face it, there are so many amazing episodes. So if you would have put the list differently, if you had another favorite episode, hey, totally fine with me. Please leave it in the comments and tell me what your list would be like. There are a few episodes that I'm talking about today that have mild spoilers, as in I cannot talk about them without giving some spoilers for the later seasons of the show. There are only a few of them, but keep that in mind if you haven't seen the full show yet past like season 6, 7, 8. Without further ado, this is the top 20 best Frasier episodes, in my opinion. We start the list with number 20. I'm Listening. For once, a good episode from season 11. And for once, Frasier's annoying character traits are used to create comedy in a way that doesn't annoy me. Especially since it is all done inadvertently for the funniest reasons, like him having an apple in his mouth. And Martin calls him out in a way for it that is really funny as well. Ross having to pretend to be Sheila is kind of questionable as a plot point, but I do find it funny just doing it from a comedy standpoint. And the fact that they make an episode about Frasier's catchphrase that he has since the first episode and recontextualize it, I just find it really cool, especially for like doing it in the last season. And I like how Frasier does get to be helpful in the end to Martin and Ronnie. And number 19 is Chest Pains from season 3. I like how atmospheric this episode is. And I like to see Frasier being intellectually inferior to Martin in a certain thing. I'm pretty sure Martin lets Frasier win in the end, but they leave it up to the viewer's interpretation. And I like the subplot where Daphne convinces Niles to get the dog as a companion, and it turns out to be a replica of Maris. That just got me laughing like crazy. The one thing that I feel like could have been better is if Frasier just lost the last match as well. I was so happy to see Frasier being humiliated intellectually by Martin for once. And to see Frasier win one time and just get smug again, or at least, internally, I didn't really like that. But I can see why they ended the episode that way. I also think there was kind of a dry spot in the middle, like on multiple occasions, where there could have been a bit more substance. But overall, I thought it was a really nice episode. Number 18 is Fathers and Sons from season 10. Named after Turgeyev's epic Russian novel, this episode has always intrigued me. Not only is it hilarious to see an essentially older version of Frasier and Niles treat them like little boys when Niles himself is busy signing up his future child for an esteemed kindergarten, but there's also just so much speculative potential. Like, I really feel like Leland is at least Frasier's father. Frasier looks like a face blend between Niles and Leland, which would also explain why Hester named him after her lab rat, as revealed in season 4's Are You Being Served, as the child was her lab partner's instead of Martin's. If you notice, Leland never denied that he was the father, or that he might have been. He merely mentioned that he was gay, which does not exclude the possibility that Hester and him tried to experiment with each other before he discovered or revealed his sexuality to her. But hey, that's just a theory. Anyways, I just feel bad for Martin throughout the episode. It is the one time we see Martin's point of view, longing for his son's affection, rather than the other way around, which is probably why I love this episode so much. And Ross is also being very nice and understanding about it. Their conversations between Ross and Martin, they were very sweet. So yeah, Fathers and Sons is a good episode. Let's see what's better. Number 17 is Daphne Hates Sherry from season 4. Sherry can be a bit much and she got on my nerves a lot. I cannot imagine having her around. However, in this episode, that annoyingness is used in a good way by making her clash with Daphne and giving Daphne a little arc of her own. It is addressed as an issue. I love to see Daphne finally have an opinion of her own and agree with the Crane boys on Sherry rather than join Martin or Ross in the everyman camp like is so often the case. Daphne develops in this episode, and the way Frasier from In His Bath mediated between the two was pretty funny. If there's anything they could have done to make the episode better, they should have scrapped the part where Daphne almost sleeps with Niles and then acknowledges that Sherry might be correct on her missing sex. I think the caretaker-lover analysis that Frasier made of the two was enough of an explanation, and I do not like Sherry being treated as in the right. It's just an unnecessary plot point. Even from Niles' perspective, Daphne already sleeps over at his place. That's enough for him to be excited or create a conflict or anything. Number 16 is Blasey Boy from season 9. I hadn't laughed this hard in seasons when I saw the chair falling out of the window in front of Martin and Daphne, as if Frasier was doing it out of anger from their perspective, and the wolves set it on fire and throw it over the balcony gag. And then the realization that Martin and Frasier are functionally a married couple at the end. That was just the finishing touch on this laugh riot. Usually Frasier and Martin getting really angry and frustrated with each other would be obnoxious, but here it was very understandable from both perspectives and also funny. And I like how Frasier ended up having the chair he hated replicated, all to make Martin happy. The fact that Frasier didn't just talk it out, that he didn't get away with just talking about it or apologizing or feeling bad about it, but that he actually had to do something to earn forgiveness and to solve the conflict. And that he was actually willing to replicate this chair that he so hated. Frasier destroyed Martin's chair. It wasn't just a fight between the two. So yeah, of course he has to make up for that. Many series and films pretend like the only thing that matters is your intent or how sorry you feel about it. But honestly, when you damage something or someone, you should be able to take responsibility for the damage done as well. On the downside, the B-plot of Daphne playing the piano was very uninteresting. I don't see why that's even there. I think it would have been funnier to add 2 extra minutes of Frasier and Martin banter. Number 15 is The Candidate from season 2. I like how this episode is poking fun at political campaigns and how cheesy they are. Never is there any concrete policy mentioned in the episode. It is all just platitudes like keeping the streets safe and caring for the little people. The recordings of the campaign spots are just hilarious, and the misunderstanding where Frasier confesses about the alien beliefs of Phil was too good to be believed. I like how the episode as a whole doesn't judge Phil for believing in something he probably doesn't want to believe in himself. And I like that there's some subtle message about how politicians often don't really believe or at least live by what they preach. Phil talks about caring for the little people, but at the same time he has these foreigners working at his home, so you can assume that they're basically doing slave labor in fear of being deported. It's not a huge theme or anything, but yeah, I do like the messages they're throwing in left and right alongside some really good jokes. I was one entertained viewer, a deeply entertained viewer. Number 14 is Retirement is Murder from season 2. I like how they make an entire episode about the Weeping Lotus murder case, briefly mentioned for a joke in season 1. And the conclusion Frasier gets to is just so ridiculous that you have to love it. Especially since the rearranging of the photos does lead Martin to actually solve the crime. Which brings about an interesting message, that on one hand the context in which you perceive impulses has a strong influence on how you interpret them, but on the other hand people can still come to different interpretations from the same perceptions. I don't know if the writers thought of that or if I sound like Frasier talking about a monkey doing the murder right now. I just found that a neat subtle interpretation of the episode. The reason this one isn't higher is because I thought the ending was just a bit awkward. It wasn't necessary to humiliate Frasier even more. Number 13 is 3 Days of the Condo from season 4. This episode is just the right amount of dumb that you gotta love it. People treating the condo board as some serious political conflict, and Frasier gets what's coming for him for picking Martin's and Daphne's side without knowing the context of the notes that they received. But of course, the main reason this one is on the list is the hilarious mishap climax, where Frasier goes on a rant about Eddie. Every line of dialogue is gold there. I do have to say that the rest of the episodes feels a bit bare bones, if only it sets up for the climax. But the climax was just too good to not put it on this list. Number 12 is Tearful Goodbyes from season 9. I have never watched much of Tears, but this episode just feels so nostalgic and satisfying. Cliff leaving his own party is a really interesting plot point, and so are the speeches, and then Carla just lashing out is genius, not painful as Cliff doesn't mind. Seeing the family hit it off with Frasier's friends from the bar is also pretty cute, especially Niles learning about how Frasier was just like him. And I like the set for the party. It's a really old episode. These kinds of episodes set in a different setting than usual can turn out either really unsettling and empty, as was the case for Freudian Sleep on the previous list of the worst episodes, or they can turn out really interesting. And this one turned out very interesting, comfortable and cozy, while also funny. But I can see people not liking it. It is certainly an old episode. Number 11 is To Tell the Truth from season 6. In a pretty mediocre season, the first one to feel not like classic Frasier at all, this one stands out as being very good. What makes To Tell the Truth so good to me? Well, the fact that it is not just funny, but also feels far more substantial than most Frasier episodes, including the episodes that we've covered until here. First, we have the setup with Frasier and Ross meeting Niles at Nervosa. Then Frasier takes Niles to meet Donnie and accept him as the new lawyer. Then we get the conflict of Frasier having to lie in court. Then there's Donnie digging up Merritt's dirty secret. And then Donnie gets together with Daphne. All of this happens within one episode, when other Frasier episodes would probably cover only a third the amount of events this episode has, which, if you've seen all the episodes multiple times, makes them feel shorter than they really are. This episode never falls short for me. Each scene takes the perfect amount of time to breathe and throw in jokes without being dragged out or repetitive. In fact, whereas the previous 9 entries were each good, this is the first one that I find fantastic. Number 10 is Sleeping with the Enemy from season 3. This episode is just fun throughout with a classic plot. Kate is a really cool character in my opinion, and she works very well as an antagonizing force against Frasier, who is trying to stand up for the staff, which makes him very likable here. Kate and Frasier being attracted to each other is fine because there does seem to be chemistry, and it was foreshadowed in Leaping Lizard at the hospital. If there's anything I would criticize the episode for, is that the scene at Frasier's house where he tries to convince the other on-air hosts to stand up for the staff felt cut short. I liked it, but it could have been a longer part of the episode for my liking. Number 9 is The Two Mrs. Cranes from season 4. This is one of the best pretense episodes of the show. Clive is a really nice guest role, and it was cool to see Niles in a situation where keeping Daphne's ex around was in his own interest, rather than another one of those episodes where Niles sabotages Daphne's love life and then we're supposed to feel bad for Niles in the end. Martin was also hilarious backhanded here, taking advantage of the situation to troll Daphne and the boys, making Ross Maris, etc. He's really good at punishing the characters for not being honest, and it's just overall a very funny episode. The only problem I have is that it should have been longer. When Daphne and Ross start fighting, it gets even better than it already was, but then the episode is over. Clive leaves. It's a shame that he never came back as a guest, but still, it's a really good episode. This is what I think of when I think of classic 90s sitcoms. Number 8 is Look Before You Leap from season 3. This episode is just classic Frasier hilarity. It is the kind of episode that never gets old. Not much heart, but a lot of humor. Every character gets in on the fun, and while the climax is hilarious and not underwhelming, everything leading up to that point is just as funny. And the fact that all of this happens over the course of one day is a gimmick that just doesn't get old for me. And within this one day, we can see Frasier going from optimism to spontaneity to just outright pessimism. Ross and the guys he met on the bus, Niles longing for Maris, Daphne with her new haircut, and Martin with his flight, they all just add to this amazing episode and change Frasier's perspective on Leap Day over the course of the day. Number 7 is My Coffee with Niles. I really like when sitcoms do bottle and real-time episode. It shows a lot of artistic risk-taking and a nice change in structure in between all the normal episodes. And to have it as the first season's finale rather than just a random episode in the middle of the season really paid off well for the show. Despite entirely being set at Café Nervosa, there's no dull moment in the episode and the entire cast, including Eddie, shows up. Looking at this as the season 1 finale makes it a really good episode, but what makes it even better is when you consider that this episode, at the time of writing, might have been the last episode if the show was cancelled. The episode is written so that nothing really changes about the situation of the sitcom, so they can easily continue in season 2, but there's also some closure in the character development shown, in case the show would have been ended after the first season. This episode is, in my opinion, therefore one of the best first season finales of any show that didn't plan on ending after the first season, which is pretty ironic given how bad I found the actual finale that I put it on my worst list. Number 6 is Beloved Infidel from season 1. I love this episode. It has a good story and jokes such as the hilarious gags of Daphne snitching on the boys, but more importantly, it adds some depth to Martin's usually grumpy character, and it is very touching. I especially love the scene where Mrs. Lawler visits and Frasier confronts her when he's home alone. It starts off hilarious with Frasier doing some backhanded innuendos, but then it goes to Lawler trying to comfort Frasier and reminiscing over Frasier as a kid, as well as over his mother. Only 8 episodes into the series, it already gives a very melancholic feeling about the character that we have never seen before or after, talking about a childhood memory we never heard of. Number 5 is To Kill a Talking Bird from season 4. Niall's cockatoo baby is just hilarious, and I like the party atmosphere with both cranes trying desperately to pretend like everything is okay. I felt a bit bad for Frasier that baby ruined his shot with Stephanie. I thought he would be a good match for Frasier, but then again we've had Claire later on who was basically the same person, and that didn't go well either. And the way baby foils him is really funny. I don't have much else to say. I watch sitcoms for the comedy, and this one just provides comedy on top of a nice atmosphere and a decent story. Number 4 is Moon's Overshadow from season 9. I'm just going to say it, this is the highest ranking episodes from the later seasons. While I found its sister episode, The Guilt Trippers, really dumb for having both Frasier and Niles act out of character, this episode is amazing. Harry is one of the funniest, non-obnoxious guest characters on the show. From his job to throwing Niles out, to the gag where Niles offers Harry things and then he demands the luxury version, to his reactions to Martin. I would much rather see him than have more of Simon and Gertrude. And I found it interesting to see Daphne and Gertrude react to him coming. Gertrude just unleashing herself on Harry, but then saying, thank you Niles, it was a nice surprise. Like, she's super relieved, you know. It adds some development and relatability to her that she lacked before. She was so happy to get that resentment out of her system towards Harry and just move on with her life. And she becomes less vicious and more appreciative of Niles. And Daphne keeps on flip-flopping with being thankful and being angry, which I also can very well understand. And I love to see Gertrude and Harry reminisce over the good memories of their early relationship. Even though they have an unhappy marriage and they will end up fighting in a few seconds, even though they hate each other now, there was a time where they really enjoyed each other's company. And Harry doesn't fully regret his marriage because he did get Daphne out of it. That was really sweet. How he was willing to go to Frasier's apartment one last time just to give a monologue to Daphne about how much he values her. And how lucky she is to have Niles. It gives some closure to this story. This is an episode that isn't just hilarious, but it also has a lot of heart to it. My only issue is the ending, which felt like a very impulsive reaction from Daphne's end. But I get it, cliffhanger, so they just had to do something like, oh well, Daphne suddenly wants to marry Niles right now. Other than that, this is an amazing episode. Number 3 is An Affair to Forget from season 2. This episode is awesome, especially if you understand what they're saying in all the languages. This is what I think of when I think of classic old Frasier plots. I like how the beginning at the studio actually ties into the plot about Niles and Maris. Other things I like is that Niles is trying to bond with Martin instead of spending his time away from the house, going to the opera or a restaurant. And I like that Martha gets to play a big role. The whole Missy Crane bit and later the mistranslation with Gunnar is really funny. And then to have Niles fans against Gunnar is just an epic climax. Needless to say, there are a lot of amazing jokes in the episode. The only reason it's not my favorite is because 2 episodes just have a more memorable plot to me. But it could have very well been my favorite. And number 2 is Ham Radio from season 4. This one is already considered best of the series quite often, so instead of gloating on how funny every joke is, let's dissect why it is so immensely popular. The plot is very eventful and one of those plots made to be a classic from its concept alone, uniting all the main and recurring characters from KACL for one big performance that the main character decided to take on. This is therefore probably the most substantial feeling story that has ever come out of Frasier. Due to the incorporation of so many characters, the jokes are very various. There's Frasier being too harsh of a director, chasing the professional actor Mel White away because his Irish sounded too Protestant and his dwarf sounded too tall. One of my favorite lines of the show. This perfectionism is stereotypical to Frasier's character, and in other episodes where it's the main or only source of comedy, it can come off as grating. But here it works quite well. It isn't the main source of comedy, and the humor is in how the characters respond to his behavior. They're annoyed and respond in a very funny way to it. It's not like they're having their newsstand being burned down and are seriously hurt. And the other characters shine on themselves in unique ways. Ross, who is often used for cheap sex jokes or jokes about her being sassy, is given an entirely different inconvenience with her mumbled speech. Niles is not the uppity snob, but rather the multi-talent who has to save the day with his voices. Then there's side characters like Bulldog's girlfriend and Gil with his glorious monologue about his boyhood in Surrey that he just has to finish. Speaking of which, I would still really want to know how the story and the mystery would conclude and what Gil's speech was about. That would have made the episode even better. But for what we got a very good and substantial episode. A legendary piece of television that would be number 1 with a lot of other shows. It's just that there's another episode that I like more than this one. And that episode is, to no one's surprise, The Ski Lodge. What can I still say about The Ski Lodge, being the so many fan to call it the best episode of the series? Well, The Ski Lodge is a season 5 episode, meaning that it's from the first season where the show, in my opinion, had passed its prime. In fact, I haven't covered a single episode from the season yet on this list, whereas I've had multiple episodes from every earlier season as well as from season 9. But this episode was an outlier, not just within the season but within the show. It blows away anything that came before it or after. This episode came out in a special time frame for the show, right after Niles had finally accepted that him and Maris were done for. A time frame where they could play around with Niles as a bachelor dating women, or pursuing them, something they would usually only do with Frasier. Therefore, this episode could put both the boys in this misunderstanding cocktail around the romantic interest, with Daphne and the two guest characters, building up to one of the funniest climaxes the show has ever had. This kind of plot seems like the thing you would find in a lot of other sitcoms like Friends or How I Met Your Mother perhaps, but I really like how Frasier gave it its own touch. To be fair, they did resort to Niles' love interest being Daphne instead of some guest love interest, which I would expect to prefer as it shows experimentation and character growth. But it worked out well here because Niles didn't come off as desperate like he did so many times before this episode, as well as in certain later episodes of the next season. The moment where he tries to take Daphne to his room to tell her how he feels just shows him acting so calm and nice to her that I would have detracted points from the episode for ruining the moment if the episode didn't do that in the most hilarious way possible, with Annie laying on his bed. And about the side characters, Annie and Guy, they are so hilarious, I wonder why they didn't have them reappear in other episodes. Any other episodes, especially Annie, since she is Daphne's friend supposedly, so they will stay in touch after this, I guess. Maybe you can have an arc where Niles actually starts dating her to make Daphne jealous. Other than that, the Ski Lodge setting is really beautiful and was a relocation risk that paid off very well, just like the party setting of Cheerful Goodbyes. So he got great comedy, a great fun for the show unique plot leading up to the best climax in the show, great side characters and an awesome location. All around the perfect storm for the perfect episode. Frasier is a timeless classic, not for being the one sitcom that has no or barely any mistakes or dots whatsoever, but for having some of the finest forms of comedy at its highest heights. I am forever grateful to have seen this show, but especially the episodes on this list. They are truly fantastic works of art that unfortunately have been largely forgotten for being part of a show that, while successful, never really knew to gain the reputation needed to remain in public conscience after decades, like its contemporary Friends. Frasier is the kind of show that people know by name because it has been a successful show for 11 seasons, but not the kind of show that you can quote in public expecting people to laugh. And that's sad for the general public. But I don't care. As someone who watches a lot of shows in the streaming era, who has seen a lot of shows that are underrated, I am so glad that I have Frasier. I have 11 seasons of content to look back on. So instead of complaining about another show from the same era that people my age do know, which has every right to be because Friends is just hilarious, I think we should celebrate Frasier. And therefore, I think it would be a good idea for me to do a seasonal ranking and do a lot of other cool videos with Frasier, one of my favorite shows ever, in the future. But for now, this is my top 20 best Frasier episodes ranking. The binge watcher has left the building.